The biting wind carried Elizabeth Lowell's sobs away into the darkening Montana sky as she clutched her twins to her chest, their small bodies shivering against hers, despite the layers of blankets she'd wrapped them in. February 1878 had proven to be the cruelest of months. 3 days of walking after being abandoned by the stagecoach driver who claimed her fare had run out, Elizabeth found herself miles from the nearest town with 6-month-old twins and dwindling supplies. The temperature had dropped dramatically as the sun began to set, and the distant howl of wolves sent terror racing through her veins. "Hush now, my darlings," she whispered to little Joseph and Hannah as they whimpered against her. "Mama's here. We'll find shelter soon." But her words rang hollow even to her own ears. Her husband's death from typhoid 2 months prior had left her penniless, forcing her to seek refuge with a distant aunt in Helena. Now, with night falling and no shelter in sight, Elizabeth feared she had led her children to their deaths. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. Elizabeth stumbled forward, her strength waning. When she spotted a small outcropping of rocks that might provide minimal shelter, she nearly collapsed with relief. She huddled beneath the stone, trying desperately to shield her babies from the wind. "Please, Lord," she prayed, her voice breaking, "I don't ask for myself, but spare my children." As if in answer, the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. Elizabeth raised her head, hope and fear warring within her. A lone rider emerged from the swirling snow, leading a pack horse. He pulled his mount to a stop, staring down at the woman and infants huddled against the rocks. Ethan Blackburn had been tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on his cattle when the storm hit. He'd planned to make it back to his ranch before nightfall, but the weather had turned faster than expected. The last thing he'd anticipated finding was a woman with 2 infants out in the middle of nowhere. "Madam," he called out, dismounting quickly, "what in God's name are you doing out here?" Elizabeth looked up at the tall man approaching her. His face was partially obscured by a thick beard and the brim of his hat, but she could see the concern in his blue eyes. "The stagecoach," she began, her teeth chattering. "The driver said I hadn't paid enough. He left us." Ethan cursed under his breath. "Those stage drivers are getting worse every year." He knelt beside her, noticing how the babies were bundled tightly against her. "You've got little ones," Elizabeth nodded, pulling back the blanket just enough to reveal the twins' pale faces. "Joseph and Hannah. They're 6 months old." Without hesitation, Ethan began gathering dried brush and sticks. Within minutes, he had a small fire going, sheltered from the wind by the outcropping. "You need to get warm," he said, unpacking a thick wool blanket from his saddlebag and wrapping it around her shoulders. "Those babies too?" "Thank you," Elizabeth whispered, moving closer to the fire. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Ethan's face hardened as he stoked the flames higher. No decent man would leave a woman and children out in weather like this. He looked up at the worsening storm, then back at Elizabeth and her twins. "My ranch is about 4 miles from here, too far to travel tonight in this weather." He hesitated, then added with finality, "You're all staying with me tonight. We'll make camp here until morning." Elizabeth felt tears of relief sting her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Blackburn." "Ethan Blackburn," he replied, turning to retrieve more supplies from his pack. "And no thanks necessary, madam, just doing what needs doing." As the fire grew stronger, casting a warm glow over their little camp, Elizabeth felt the first spark of hope she'd experienced in months. The twins had stopped crying, soothed by the warmth and her gentle rocking. Ethan built a lean-to of sorts using canvas from his pack, creating a shelter that would keep the snow off them. He moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to surviving in harsh conditions, his strong hands working quickly in the firelight. "Are you hungry?" he asked, offering her jerky and hardtack from his provisions. Elizabeth nodded gratefully. "Yes, thank you. I haven't eaten since morning, and the twins need me to keep my strength up." Ethan watched as she ate, noting her refined mannerisms despite her bedraggled appearance. Her honey-brown hair had come loose from its pins, framing a face that, though tired and worried, showed a quiet dignity that impressed him. "Where were you headed, Mrs.?" he asked, realizing he didn't know her name. "Lowell, Elizabeth Lowell," she replied. I was traveling to Helena. My aunt lives there after my husband died. Her voice caught. After Thomas died, I had nowhere else to go. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Lowell. Please call me Elizabeth, she said softly. After what you're doing for us, formality seems unnecessary. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. Elizabeth, then. He checked on his horses, ensuring they were as protected as possible from the elements before returning to the fire. You should try to sleep, the little ones too. I'll keep watch and tend the fire. Elizabeth hesitated, unused to trusting strangers, but exhaustion won out. She arranged herself and the twins as comfortably as possible under the makeshift shelter, the babies nestled against her. Mr. Blackburn, Ethan, he corrected. Ethan, she amended with a slight smile. Thank you again, you saved our lives tonight, he nodded, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. Get some rest, Elizabeth. As she drifted toward sleep, Elizabeth watched him through half-closed eyes. Silhouetted against the fire, with snowflakes catching in his dark hair and beard, he looked like something out of a painting, rugged and wild, yet there was a gentleness to him that belied his rough exterior. Ethan added more wood to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. He'd been alone on his ranch for 5 years, ever since losing his wife and infant son to a fever. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, preferring the company of his horses and cattle to people. But something about this woman and her babies tugged at emotions he thought long buried. The night deepened, and the snow fell steadily around them, but within their small circle of firelight, warmth prevailed against the Montana winter. Morning came with clearing skies and brilliant sunshine that transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. Elizabeth woke to find Ethan already up, tending to the horses and preparing coffee over a freshly built fire. Good morning, he said when he noticed her stirring. How are the little ones? Elizabeth checked on the twins, who were still sleeping peacefully. They're fine, thank goodness. Better than they've been in days. She accepted the tin cup of coffee he offered her with a grateful smile. I can't remember the last time I slept so soundly, despite everything. Exhaustion will do that, Ethan replied, his voice gruff but not unkind. He knelt to examine the babies' faces in the morning light. They look healthy enough, strong too, to have made it through yesterday. Elizabeth nodded proudly. They've been through so much already in their short lives, their father never even got to see them born. She looked down at her wedding band, twisting it absently. Thomas fell ill while I was carrying them. He held on just long enough to know they were coming, but Ethan nodded, understanding her unspoken grief. Children are resilient, more than we give them credit for. There was something in his voice that suggested personal knowledge of such matters, but Elizabeth didn't pry. After a simple breakfast of jerky and the last of Ethan's hardtack, they prepared to leave. Elizabeth watched as he efficiently packed up their campsite, erasing nearly all evidence of their presence except for the ashes of their fire. My ranch isn't far, he explained as he helped her onto his horse, carefully positioning her so she could hold both twins securely. He would lead the horse on foot. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid. You and the little ones can rest there before continuing your journey. As they traveled, Elizabeth took in the breathtaking Montana landscape. Snow-capped mountains dominated the horizon, while closer at hand, pine forests gave way to open meadows. Despite the cold, there was a stark beauty to it all that she couldn't help but admire. How long have you lived out here? She asked, curious about this solitary man who had saved them. Ethan walked steadily beside the horse, his breath visible in the cold air. Almost 10 years now, built the place myself, starting with just a one-room cabin. It's grown some since then, all alone. The question slipped out before she could stop herself, and she immediately regretted it when she saw his shoulders stiffen. Not always, he answered after a long pause. My wife, Sarah, and our son, William, were with me for the first 5 years. His voice grew quieter. Lost them both to scarlet fever in '73. Elizabeth's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, Ethan, truly. He nodded once, acknowledgement of her sympathy without inviting further conversation on the subject. They continued in companionable silence for a time, The only sounds the crunch of snow beneath Ethan's boots and the occasional whicker from the horses. By mid-morning, they crested a small rise, and Ethan's ranch came into view. The main house was larger than Elizabeth had expected, a substantial log structure with smoke curling from its chimney. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a corral held a small herd of horses. Beyond, she could see cattle grazing in a distant pasture. "You have someone looking after things?" she asked, surprised by the smoke from the chimney. "My ranch hand, Miguel, and his wife, Rosa. They live in a cabin behind the main house." Ethan smiled slightly. "Rosa keeps the place from falling into complete disarray when I'm gone. She'll have kept the fire going." As they approached, a Mexican man emerged from one of the outbuildings, waving when he spotted them. He hurried forward to meet them, his expression shifting from welcome to surprise when he saw Elizabeth and the twins. "Señor Ethan, we were worried when you did not return yesterday." His eyes moved to Elizabeth. "You have found guests." "More like they found me, Miguel," Ethan replied. "This is Mrs. Elizabeth Lowell and her children. They were stranded in the storm." "Mrs. Lowell, this is Miguel Vasquez, the best ranch hand in the territory." Miguel nodded respectfully to Elizabeth. "Señora, welcome to Blackburn Ranch." "Thank you," Elizabeth replied warmly. "We're very grateful for your employer's kindness." "See, Señor Ethan has a good heart, though he tries to hide it," Miguel said with a knowing smile, earning a gruff look from Ethan. "Miguel, take care of the horses. I'll get Mrs. Lowell and her children settled inside." Ethan helped Elizabeth down from the horse, careful not to disturb the twins who had fallen asleep again. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. Though masculine in its furnishings, it was clean and well kept, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall of the main room. A solid wooden table with chairs stood in one corner, while a couple of armchairs were positioned near the fire. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that suggested Ethan was more well-read than his rugged appearance might indicate. "Rosa has kept it warm in here," Ethan noted with approval, gesturing toward a closed door. "The bedroom's through there. You can rest and tend to the little ones in privacy." Before Elizabeth could respond, the back door opened, and a plump, middle-aged Mexican woman entered, her arms full of firewood. She stopped short at the sight of Elizabeth and the twins, then broke into a wide smile. "Dios mío, children in the house again." She set down the wood and approached, her dark eyes warm with welcome. "I am Rosa, Señora. Let me see these little angels." Elizabeth found herself immediately at ease with Rosa's motherly manner. The woman cooed over Joseph and Hannah, declaring them the most beautiful babies she had seen since Miguel's niece Lucia was born. "They need baths, these precious ones, and warm food for their mama," Rosa declared, already taking charge. "Señor Ethan, you go with Miguel. Men underfoot are no help with babies." To Elizabeth's surprise, Ethan complied without argument, though she caught a hint of amusement in his eyes as he left. Within an hour, Rosa had helped Elizabeth bathe both twins in a small tub by the fire, provided clean clothes for all three of them. "From the chest of things I keep, just in case, you understand," and prepared a hearty stew that filled the house with delicious aromas. "Rosa, I can't thank you enough," Elizabeth said as she sat at the table watching the older woman rock Hannah while Joseph slept in a makeshift cradle. "You've been so kind." Rosa waved away her thanks. "It is nothing, Señora. This house has been too quiet for too long." Children and a mother's voice, this is what a home needs. She looked thoughtfully at Elizabeth. "Señor Ethan, he has been alone too many years, not good for a man." Elizabeth felt herself blush. "Oh, we won't be staying long. Just until the weather improves and I can find transportation to Helena." Rosa made a non-committal sound that somehow managed to convey skepticism. "Montana winter is long, Señora, very long." Before Elizabeth could respond, the door opened and Ethan entered, stomping snow from his boots. His cheeks were ruddy from the cold, but his expression softened noticeably when he saw Hannah in Rosa's arms and Joseph sleeping peacefully. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, hanging his coat by the door. "Perfect, thanks to Rosa," Elizabeth replied. "She's been wonderful." Rosa stood, carefully transferring Hannah to Elizabeth's arms. I must go now. Miguel will be hungry. I will come tomorrow to help with the babies. She patted Ethan's arm as she passed. Eat your stew before it gets cold, Jeef. After she left, a slightly awkward silence fell between Ethan and Elizabeth. He served himself stew, then sat across from her at the table. Rosa can be forceful, he said after a moment, a hint of amusement in his voice, but she means well. Elizabeth smiled. She's lovely. The twins took to her immediately. She hesitated, then added, Ethan, I want you to know that I don't expect charity. As soon as possible, I'll continue to Helena. I have some skills I can sew quite well, and I was a teacher before I married. I won't be a burden on my aunt for long. Ethan regarded her thoughtfully. It's nearly 40 miles to Helena from here. The next stagecoach won't come through for at least 2 weeks, and that's assuming the weather cooperates. He gestured toward the window, where snow had begun falling again. February in Montana is no time for traveling with infants. March isn't much better. Elizabeth felt her heart sink. But surely there must be some way to. You're welcome to stay here until spring, Ethan interrupted, his tone matter of fact. There's plenty of room, and Rosa would never forgive me if I sent those babies back out into the cold. He met her gaze directly. No strings attached, Mrs. Lowell, just one neighbor helping another. The sincerity in his blue eyes convinced her he meant every word. Throat tight with emotion, Elizabeth nodded. Thank you, we accept your generous offer. That evening, after the twins were asleep in the bedroom Elizabeth now occupied, she sat with Ethan by the fire. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside all was warm and peaceful. May I ask what brought you out west initially? Ethan inquired, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Elizabeth smiled wistfully. Thomas, my husband, was convinced there were opportunities here that we'd never find back in Pennsylvania. He had dreams of starting a newspaper. She sighed. We settled in a small town near Bozeman. Thomas worked for the local paper while saving to start his own. Then I discovered I was expecting. Her hand absently went to her wedding ring again. He was so excited when we learned it was twins. What happened? Ethan asked gently. Typhoid swept through the town last fall. Thomas was among the first to fall ill. Elizabeth blinked back tears at the memory. He fought so hard, wanting to live to see his children born, but he passed just before Christmas. The twins came 2 weeks later. Ethan's expression was solemn. That's a heavy burden to bear alone. Yes, she admitted. After the babies were born, I tried to manage, but without Thomas's income, well, the town had suffered greatly from the epidemic. There was little work available, especially for a new mother of twins. She looked into the fire. My Aunt Agatha is my only remaining family. She wrote that I could stay with her in Helena until I found my feet again. And the stagecoach driver abandoned you. Ethan's voice held a hint of anger. Elizabeth nodded. I paid what I could, but it wasn't enough to reach Helena. He said business was business and left us at a way station. I thought I could walk to the next town, but I misjudged the distance and the weather. Ethan's jaw tightened. What was the driver's name? Which company? Why does it matter now? Elizabeth asked, surprised by his intensity. Because no decent man leaves a woman and babies to die, he replied firmly. Actions have consequences, Mrs. Lowell, even out here. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't idle talk, but Elizabeth was too tired to pursue it. His name was Jenkins, I believe, with the Overland Stage Company. Ethan nodded once, committing the information to memory. Thank you. His expression softened. You should get some rest. Those little ones will be awake before you know it. Elizabeth knew he was right. She stood, suddenly aware of how comfortable she felt in his presence despite having known him for just a day. Good night, Ethan, and thank you again for everything. As she turned to go, he called after her softly, Elizabeth. She looked back at him, caught by the gentleness in his voice. You're doing right by your children. Thomas would be proud. His words brought fresh tears to her eyes, but these were healing tears, not the desperate ones of the previous night. Thank you, she whispered, and retreated to the bedroom where her babies slept. The days that followed fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Rosa came each morning to help with the twins. Teaching Elizabeth how to make simple remedies for colic and teething from herbs she grew in a small indoor garden. Miguel showed her how to milk the goats they kept for fresh dairy, insisting that goat's milk would make the babies strong. Ethan maintained a respectful distance, but Elizabeth often caught him watching the twins with a softness in his eyes that belied his usually stern demeanor. He spent his days tending to ranch business, checking on cattle, repairing equipment, and preparing for the spring calving season that would soon be upon them. In the evenings, after the twins were asleep, Elizabeth and Ethan would sit by the fire. Sometimes they talked about books they had read, places they had seen, or the day's small events. Other times they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence between them, each finding solace in the other's presence. By the end of February, Elizabeth realized with a start that she had begun thinking of the ranch as home. The twins were thriving, growing stronger every day in the warmth and safety of Ethan's house. Joseph had developed a particular fascination with Ethan, his eyes following the tall rancher whenever he was in the room. Hannah, meanwhile, had captured Miguel's heart completely, the ranch hand fashioning tiny wooden toys for her that she clutched in her pudgy hands. One evening, as Elizabeth mended one of Ethan's shirts by the fire, she broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Ethan, I've been thinking, I can't continue to impose on your generosity without contributing something." He looked up from the leather bridle he was repairing. "You're not imposing, Elizabeth. I meant what I said about staying until spring." "I know, and I appreciate that more than I can say," she replied earnestly, "but I need to feel useful. I've noticed your account books on the desk, they're quite disorganized." "I have experience with bookkeeping from helping Thomas at the newspaper. Perhaps I could assist you with them." Ethan considered this, then nodded slowly. "They're a mess, I'll admit. I'm not much for paperwork." A slight smile crossed his face. "If you're determined to help, I won't stop you." Elizabeth beamed, pleased to have a way to repay some small part of his kindness. "Wonderful, I'll start tomorrow." As February gave way to March, the worst of winter began to ease. The snow still blanketed the ground, but the days grew slightly longer, and occasionally the temperature rose enough that Elizabeth could take the twins outside, bundled up against the cold. Ethan built a small sleigh that could be pulled behind a gentle mare, allowing Elizabeth and the babies to enjoy rides around the ranch property on clear days. Working on Ethan's accounts gave Elizabeth unexpected insights into the man himself. His dealings were scrupulously fair, even generous at times. She discovered he had loaned money to several neighboring families during hard times, often with terms so favorable they amounted to gifts. When she mentioned this to him, he shrugged it off. "I've been fortunate," was all he would say. A man ought to share his good fortune. Elizabeth also noticed he regularly sent money to a children's home in Helena, the same town where her aunt lived. The coincidence sparked her curiosity. "You have a connection to the St. Mary's Children's Home?" she asked one evening. Ethan's hands stilled on the piece of wood he was whittling. "I support their work," he said simply, but she sensed there was more to the story. "It's a wonderful cause," Elizabeth agreed, deciding not to press further when she saw the shadow that crossed his face. Instead, she shared her own news. "I received a letter from Aunt Agatha today. Miguel brought it from town." Ethan looked up, his expression unreadable. "Good news, I hope?" "Yes and no," Elizabeth replied. "She's well, which is a relief. But she writes that she's planning to sell her house and move to San Francisco to live with her sister, my other aunt. She apologizes for not being able to take us in after all." "I'm sorry to hear that," Ethan said, though Elizabeth thought she detected a hint of something else in his voice. Relief, perhaps. She shook her head. "Truthfully, I'm not as disappointed as I should be. The prospect of moving again with the twins was daunting." She hesitated, then added, "I'll need to find work somewhere, though, perhaps in one of the larger towns nearby." Ethan was silent for a long moment, the only sound in the room the soft crackle of the fire and the rhythmic scrape of his knife against wood. Finally, he set down his carving a small horse that was clearly intended for Joseph, who had shown a fascination with Ethan's mount. "There's no need for you to leave," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. The ranch needs help with the accounts, as you've seen. And Rosa isn't getting any younger. She could use an extra pair of hands with the house. Elizabeth stared at him, surprised by the offer. Are you suggesting I stay on as an employee? Ethan met her gaze steadily. For now, yes, with room and board for you and the little ones plus wages. If that arrangement suits you. It was more than generous, and Elizabeth knew it. Still, she hesitated, aware that living under Ethan's roof indefinitely would invite gossip, even in this remote location. As if reading her thoughts, he added, Rosa and Miguel would provide the proper appearance of things. No one would question your presence here with them as chaperones, so to speak. Elizabeth couldn't help but smile at his old-fashioned concern for her reputation. You've thought of everything? I try to, he replied simply. Take some time to consider the offer. There's no rush to decide. But Elizabeth already knew her answer. The thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Ethan, created an ache in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. In just a few weeks, this place and its people had become more home to her than anywhere she'd been since losing Thomas. I don't need time, she said softly. We'll stay if you're certain it's what you want. Something flickered in Ethan's blue eyes, a warmth that made Elizabeth's breath catch. It is, he confirmed, and returned to his carving with a new lightness in his movements. As March progressed, the snow began to melt in earnest, revealing patches of muddy ground that would soon give way to spring grass. With calving season approaching, the ranch grew busier. Ethan and Miguel spent long hours checking on pregnant heifers, while Rosa and Elizabeth prepared for the inevitable round-the-clock work that would follow once the calves began arriving. Elizabeth found herself settling deeper into ranch life. She took over more household duties, freeing Rosa to focus on her beloved garden now that the ground was thawing. The twins, now 8 months old, were becoming more active every day. Joseph had mastered crawling and showed every intention of walking soon, while Hannah was more cautious but equally determined in her own way. One particularly warm afternoon, Elizabeth sat on a blanket outside with the twins, watching them explore the small patch of bare ground near the house. Ethan approached from the barn, his sleeves rolled up, evidence of a hard day's work clear in the tired set of his shoulders. How are the little explorers today? He asked, crouching down to let Joseph grab his finger. Determined to get as muddy as possible, Elizabeth laughed, reaching out to prevent Hannah from putting a fistful of dirt in her mouth. They're fascinated by being outdoors after so long cooped up inside. Ethan smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his rugged features. Over the weeks, Elizabeth had noticed he smiled more often, especially around the twins. Can't blame them. A Montana spring is worth waiting for. He picked up Joseph, who squealed in delight. The baby had formed a strong attachment to Ethan, lighting up whenever the rancher entered a room. For his part, Ethan seemed equally taken with the child, often carrying him around the house or yard when his work allowed. You're very good with him, Elizabeth observed softly. A shadow passed briefly across Ethan's face. I had some practice once. He rarely spoke of his lost son, and Elizabeth knew the wound was still deep. William would be proud of the man his father is, she said gently, reaching out to touch his arm. As would Sarah. Ethan's eyes met hers, surprise and something deeper swimming in their blue depths. Thank you, he said simply, but the emotion in those two words spoke volumes. The moment stretched between them, a connection forming that went beyond words. Joseph broke the spell by reaching for Ethan's beard with a gleeful gurgle. He's going to pull it right off one of these days, Ethan chuckled, carefully extracting his beard from the baby's grip. Perhaps it's time for a trim, Elizabeth suggested, smiling at the interaction. I cut Thomas's hair regularly. I could do yours if you'd like. Ethan considered this, running a hand through his shaggy hair. Might not be a bad idea, spring cleaning of sorts. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Elizabeth set up a chair in the kitchen. Ethan sat down, looking slightly uncomfortable as she draped a towel around his shoulders. It's been a while since anyone's done this for me, he admitted as she prepared the scissors and comb Rosa had provided. Well, I promise not to take too much off, Elizabeth assured him, beginning to trim his dark hair. She worked carefully, aware of his broad shoulders beneath her hands, the warmth of him so close to her. His hair was surprisingly soft despite its unruly appearance, and she found herself enjoying the simple intimacy of the task. When she moved to his beard, she had to stand directly in front of him, tilting his face up to get a better angle. Their eyes met, and Elizabeth felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness about her barbering skills. "Elizabeth," Ethan said softly, his voice deeper than usual. "Yes," she whispered, suddenly very aware of how close they were. Before he could respond, a cry came from the bedroom, Hannah, waking from a bad dream. The moment broken, Elizabeth stepped back. "I should go to her." Ethan nodded, clearing his throat. "Of course, thank you for the trim." As Elizabeth tended to Hannah, soothing the baby back to sleep, her mind kept returning to that moment in the kitchen. The look in Ethan's eyes had stirred feelings she thought had died with Thomas, feelings she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge, let alone act upon. April arrived with its customary mix of sunshine and rain showers. The landscape transformed rapidly, the browns and whites of winter giving way to vibrant greens as grass and wildflowers emerged. The ranch hummed with activity as calves were born and the remaining snow melted away completely. Elizabeth watched in amazement as the twins responded to the changing season. They seemed to grow more each day, babbling constantly and exploring their expanding world with endless curiosity. Joseph took his first tentative steps holding onto Ethan's hands, while Hannah discovered a love for the wildflowers Elizabeth brought inside to brighten the house. One morning, as Elizabeth was hanging laundry outside to dry in the spring breeze, she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of town. She shaded her eyes, recognizing the local sheriff, a gruff older man named Wilson whom she had met when he stopped by the ranch on his regular patrols. "Morning, Mrs. Lowell," he called as he dismounted. "Is Ethan around?" "He's checking the north pasture with Miguel," she replied. "Is everything all right, Sheriff?" Wilson removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Just passing along some news, that stage driver you asked about, Jenkins. He won't be abandoning any more women and children in the wilderness." Elizabeth's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Word came from Helena yesterday. Jenkins lost his job with the stage company after some complaints about his conduct reached the main office. The sheriff's eyes held a knowing look. Seems someone made quite an effort to ensure his employers knew exactly what kind of man they had driving for them. Elizabeth felt a rush of emotions, surprise, vindication, and something like warmth spreading through her chest. "I see," she said carefully. "That's good to know." Sheriff Wilson nodded, replacing his hat. "Thought Ethan would want to hear, but I can see you'll pass along the message." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Lowell." After he rode away, Elizabeth continued hanging laundry, her mind whirling. Had Ethan gone to such lengths on her behalf? The thought both touched and troubled her. She wasn't looking for vengeance against Jenkins, but she couldn't deny feeling relieved that he wouldn't put another woman in danger as he had her. When Ethan returned around midday, she told him about the sheriff's visit. His expression remained neutral, but a certain satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. "You reported Jenkins to the stage company?" she asked directly. Ethan didn't deny it. "I wrote some letters." "So did Sheriff Wilson and the mayor of White Pine." He met her gaze steadily. "What he did was unconscionable, Elizabeth. He needed to be held accountable." "Thank you," she said softly, touched by his sense of justice. "Not just for me, but for whoever might have been next." Ethan nodded, then changed the subject. "The apple trees near the creek are blooming. I thought the twins might enjoy seeing them if you'd like to ride out there this afternoon." Elizabeth recognized his discomfort with her gratitude and accepted the diversion. "That sounds lovely." Joseph has been fascinated with the horses lately. They set out after lunch, the twins securely fastened in a special carrier Ethan had designed that attached to his gentlest mare. Elizabeth rode beside him on a docile gelding he kept for guests. The day was perfect warm sunshine, a light breeze, and clear blue skies that seemed to stretch forever over the Montana landscape. The apple orchard was small, just a dozen trees that a previous owner had planted along the creek that ran through Ethan's property. In full bloom, they created a canopy of delicate pink and white blossoms, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Ethan spread a blanket beneath the largest tree, and they sat with the twins between them, watching as Joseph and Hannah reached for falling petals with delighted gurgles. "It's beautiful here," Elizabeth said, looking around at the peaceful setting. "I never imagined Montana could be so lovely." "It changes with each season," Ethan replied, his voice warm with affection for his adopted home. "Spring is spectacular, but wait until you see summer wildflowers everywhere, deer bringing their fawns down to the creek at dawn." He paused, seeming to realize the implication of his words that she would still be here to see these things. Elizabeth felt a flutter in her chest at the thought. The arrangement they had struck was open-ended, but neither had spoken of how long she might stay. Now, sitting beneath the apple blossoms with him, watching their shadows dance across the blanket, she found herself hoping it might be a very long time indeed. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "To see the seasons change here." Ethan's eyes met hers, a question in their depths. Before he could speak, Hannah chose that moment to attempt crawling off the blanket, requiring both adults' attention. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that whatever was growing between them might have deeper roots than either had admitted. That evening, after the twins were asleep, a spring thunderstorm rolled through, bringing heavy rain that drummed on the roof. Elizabeth and Ethan sat by the fire, each with a book. Though Elizabeth found herself reading the same page over and over, distracted by her thoughts and the man across from her, a particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and Ethan looked up with concern. "Never cared for storms?" he asked. Elizabeth smiled ruefully. "Not since I was a child. My father used to say thunder was just angels moving furniture in heaven, but I never quite believed him." Ethan chuckled. "My mother said it was God going bowling, equally unconvincing." The shared childhood memory created a warm connection between them. Elizabeth set down her book, deciding to broach the subject that had been on her mind since their visit to the apple orchard. "Ethan, I've been thinking about our arrangement." His expression grew guarded. "Yes." "It's been nearly 2 months since you found us in the snow. You've been more than generous, and the twins and I have imposed on your hospitality long enough." Ethan's face fell slightly, though he tried to hide it. "You're not thinking of leaving?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Actually, I'm thinking of staying permanently if you'll have us." She rushed on before her courage failed. "The twins are thriving here. I've come to love the ranch, and I believe I can contribute meaningfully to its operation. But I want to be clear about expectations and arrangements." Relief washed over Ethan's features. "I want you to stay, Elizabeth, all 3 of you." He set his book aside and leaned forward. "The house feels like a home again with you and the little ones in it." "I hadn't realized how empty it was until you filled it." His words warmed her heart, but Elizabeth needed clarity. "As your housekeeper and bookkeeper," Ethan hesitated, a rare uncertainty crossing his face. "If that's what you want, but I had hoped." He trailed off, then stood abruptly, moving to the window to watch the rain. Elizabeth followed him, her heart pounding. "What did you hope, Ethan?" He turned to face her, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "I know it hasn't been long since you lost Thomas. I know the twins are your priority, as they should be, but these past weeks, I've begun to feel things I thought I'd never feel again after Sarah." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, Elizabeth, more than I should, perhaps, given our circumstances." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness but from a profound relief at hearing aloud what she had begun to hope. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I didn't expect it. After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over, but being here with you—" She shook her head, struggling to find the right words. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, Elizabeth. There's no rush, we have time." A tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, and the twins began to cry from the bedroom. The moment broken, Elizabeth squeezed Ethan's hand once before going to comfort her children. As she soothed Joseph and Hannah back to sleep, Elizabeth's mind whirled with the implications of their conversation. Ethan cared for her and she for him, but was it too soon after Thomas? Would loving another man somehow dishonor her late husband's memory? And what of the twins? What would it mean for them? When she returned to the main room, Ethan had banked the fire and was preparing to retire to his own room across the hall from hers. "They're asleep again," she told him. "The thunder frightened them, but they settled quickly," he nodded. "Good. They're resilient children." He hesitated, then added, "Elizabeth, about what I said earlier, I don't want you to feel any pressure. Nothing needs to change if you're not ready." The consideration in his voice, his willingness to wait, only confirmed what her heart already knew. "Thank you for understanding," she said softly. "I just need a little time. You have it," he assured her. "Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, Ethan." In the weeks that followed, spring settled fully over the ranch. The pace of work increased as Ethan and Miguel prepared fields for planting, while Rosa's garden flourished under her expert care. Elizabeth fell into the rhythm of ranch life completely, dividing her time between caring for the twins, keeping the books, and helping with household tasks. Her relationship with Ethan developed slowly, naturally. There were small touches, his hand at her elbow as they walked, her fingers brushing his as she passed him coffee at breakfast. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with a warmth in his eyes that made her blush like a schoolgirl. Other times, she was the one stealing glances at him as he worked outside, admiring the strength and confidence with which he moved. The twins, now 9 months old, became more engaging each day. Joseph was walking unsteadily, falling often but always getting back up with determined persistence. Hannah, though not yet walking, communicated with increasing clarity through gestures and babbled sounds that were beginning to resemble words. Both children had formed strong attachments to Ethan. Joseph followed him whenever possible, watching in fascination as he worked on simple tasks around the house. Hannah would light up when he entered a room, reaching for him with chubby hands and a beaming smile. For his part, Ethan showed endless patience with them, taking time each day to play with them despite his busy schedule. Watching him with her children made Elizabeth's heart ache in the best possible way. Thomas had been taken from them before he could be the father he'd wanted to be. Now, seeing Ethan step naturally into that role without trying to replace Thomas in their lives, Elizabeth felt a deeper appreciation for the man he was. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after the twins were asleep, Elizabeth made a decision. The time for hesitation was past. "Ethan," she said quietly, turning to face him in the fading light, "I've been thinking about what you said about caring for me." He met her gaze steadily, waiting for her to continue. "I've come to realize that Thomas would want me to be happy," she went on. "He would want the twins to have a father who loves them, a proper home, a family." She took a deep breath. "I believe I've found all those things here with you." Ethan reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Elizabeth smiled, her heart full. "I'm saying I love you, Ethan Blackburn. I didn't expect to find love again, especially not so soon, but I can't deny what I feel." Emotion flooded Ethan's face, joy, relief, and a tenderness that took her breath away. "I love you too, Elizabeth. You and those little ones have brought life back to this place and to me." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I never thought I'd have a second chance at happiness after losing Sarah and William, but finding you in that snowstorm. It was like God was giving me another opportunity to be the man I was meant to be." Elizabeth felt tears of happiness spring to her eyes. "You already are that man, Ethan, the man who wouldn't leave a woman and her children to die in the cold. The man who opens his home and his heart without reservation." In the soft glow of twilight, Ethan leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Elizabeth met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His hand came up to cradle her cheek, gentle despite its strength, and Elizabeth leaned into his touch, allowing herself to embrace this new beginning fully. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this properly," he murmured. "I want to court you, Elizabeth Lowell, with the respect you deserve." Elizabeth laughed softly. I think we're past the point of traditional courtship, Ethan. We've been living under the same roof for months. All the more reason to do things right from here forward, he insisted, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Starting with asking your permission to call on you officially with the intention of making you my wife if and when you're ready. The formal request, so unexpected and yet so perfectly Ethan, touched Elizabeth deeply. Permission granted, Mr. Blackburn, she replied, matching his tone before breaking into a radiant smile, and I suspect you won't have to wait too long for your answer. May brought warm days and cool nights, perfect weather for the ranch work that kept Ethan busy from dawn until dusk. The calving season had passed successfully, with a healthy crop of new additions to the herd. The vegetable garden flourished under Rosa's expert care, promising fresh produce for the summer months ahead. Elizabeth watched with joy as the twins explored their expanding world. Joseph's first steps had become confident strides as he toddled around the yard, fascinated by everything from butterflies to Ethan's boots. Hannah, not to be outdone by her brother, had begun pulling herself up on furniture, determined to join in his adventures. True to his word, Ethan courted Elizabeth with old-fashioned propriety, despite their unusual living arrangement. He brought her wildflowers gathered during his rides around the property, carved small wooden toys for the twins, and took the family on picnics to his favorite spots on the ranch when time allowed. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit together on the porch or by the fire, talking for hours or simply enjoying each other's company. Physical affection between them remained respectful, tender kisses, hands held beneath the stars, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset. Despite the restraint they both maintained, Elizabeth felt the depth of Ethan's feelings in every look, every touch, every consideration he showed her and the twins. Rosa, ever observant, watched their growing relationship with obvious approval. "It is good to see the Señor happy again," she told Elizabeth one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. "For too long he has been alone with his grief." "He told me about his wife and son," Elizabeth said softly, kneading dough for the bread that would accompany dinner. "It must have been devastating," Rosa crossed herself. "The fever came so quickly, 2 days and they were gone. The Señor, he wanted to go with them, I think. For a long time he worked himself to exhaustion every day as if trying to join them in heaven." She shook her head sadly. "But God had other plans, and now he has sent you and the little angels." The simple faith with which Rosa viewed their situation touched Elizabeth deeply. "I hope I can be worthy of the second chance we've all been given." "You already are, Señora," Rosa assured her, patting her hand with flour-covered fingers. "You already are." As May progressed, the ranch received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Wilson arrived one afternoon with news that brought a shadow to Ethan's face. "Blackwood's out of prison," the sheriff announced grimly as they stood in the yard. "Thought you should know." Elizabeth, who was watching the twins play nearby, noticed how Ethan's body tensed at the name. "When?" he asked, his voice tight. "Released last week from the territorial prison." "Good behavior, they said." Wilson spat on the ground, clearly disapproving. "Heard he was headed back this way, talking about unfinished business in White Pine." Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "Appreciate the warning, Sheriff." After Wilson departed, Elizabeth approached Ethan cautiously, concerned by the darkness that had settled over his features. "Who's Blackwood?" she asked gently. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Victor Blackwood. He owned the neighboring ranch before I bought him out 5 years ago. His land was going to waste. He spent more time drinking and gambling than ranching." His jaw tightened. "He took exception to me expanding my property, made threats." "What happened?" Elizabeth pressed, sensing there was more to the story. "One night, he and some hired guns tried to burn me out. Set fire to my barn with the horses inside." Ethan's eyes grew distant with the memory. "I caught them in the act. There was a fight. Blackwood shot one of my ranch hands, not Miguel, a younger fellow named Carter. The boy died." Elizabeth gasped. "How terrible." "Blackwood went to prison for it, but only got 5 years. Ethan shook his head. Should have been longer, but his family had connections in Helena. And now he's free, Elizabeth said, understanding Ethan's concern. Do you think he'll come here, try to cause trouble again? Ethan's gaze moved to the twins who were playing happily in the grass. I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances, not with you and the little ones here. He put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. I'll increase patrols around the property. Miguel and I will take turns keeping watch at night. Elizabeth leaned into his embrace, worry gnawing at her. Should we leave, go somewhere safe until this blows over? No, Ethan said firmly. This is our home. I won't be driven from it by Blackwood or anyone else. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But I want you to be extra vigilant. Don't go far from the house alone and keep the twins close. Despite Ethan's reassurances, a cloud seemed to hang over the ranch in the days that followed. Miguel carried a rifle when he worked in the distant pastures. Rosa kept the house locked, something she had never done before. And Ethan's face took on a watchfulness that reminded Elizabeth of the wary predators she sometimes glimpsed at the forest's edge. A week passed without incident, and Elizabeth began to hope that perhaps Blackwood had moved on, seeking his unfinished business elsewhere. She and the twins resumed their daily routine, though she heeded Ethan's warning to stay close to the house. One particularly beautiful afternoon, as Elizabeth sat on the porch mending while the twins napped inside, she spotted a rider approaching from the east, the direction opposite to town. She shaded her eyes, trying to make out details. It wasn't Ethan or Miguel, both were working in the south pasture. The rider's posture was unfamiliar, and something about the way he approached directly, with no hesitation, set alarm bells ringing in Elizabeth's mind. She gathered her sewing quickly and moved inside, locking the door behind her. Through the window, she watched as the rider drew closer, finally stopping in front of the house. He was a tall, thin man with graying hair and a face weathered by the elements and hard living. He dismounted with the stiffness of someone who had spent too long in the saddle or perhaps too long in confinement. A knock came at the door, firm and demanding. Elizabeth remained silent, her heart pounding. The man knocked again, then called out, I know someone's home. Saw you on the porch, madam. Elizabeth hesitated, then approached the door, keeping it locked. Who are you? She called through the wood. What do you want? Name's Victor Blackwood, came the reply, confirming her worst fears. Just looking to have a word with Ethan Blackburn. He around? He's not here, Elizabeth answered, trying to keep her voice steady. You should come back another time. A chuckle from the other side of the door sent chills down her spine. No rush, madam, I can wait. Been waiting 5 years already, what's a few more hours? Elizabeth heard the creak of the porch steps as Blackwood settled himself to wait. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to remain calm for the twins' sake. They were still sleeping soundly, unaware of the danger lurking outside their home. Moving quietly to Ethan's desk, Elizabeth retrieved the pistol he kept in the top drawer. She had never fired a gun in her life, but Ethan had shown her how it worked, insisting she should know in case of emergency. This, she realized with a sinking heart, was exactly the kind of situation he had feared. Elizabeth positioned herself near the window where she could watch Blackwood without being seen. He had seated himself on the porch steps, casually rolling a cigarette as if he had all the time in the world. The sight of him so at ease, so confident in his power to intimidate, stirred something beyond fear in Elizabeth's heart, a determination to protect her family at all costs. Nearly an hour passed in this tense standoff. The twins woke from their nap, and Elizabeth kept them occupied in the bedroom, away from windows where Blackwood might glimpse them. She prayed that Ethan and Miguel would return soon, that they would notice the unfamiliar horse and approach with caution. Her prayers were answered when she heard hoofbeats approaching from the south. Peering carefully from the window, she saw Ethan riding toward the house, Miguel following at a distance. Ethan pulled up short when he spotted Blackwood's horse, then dismounted slowly, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Blackwood stood, crushing his cigarette beneath his boot heel. Afternoon, Blackburn, he called, his voice carrying easily through the window. Been a while. Elizabeth watched as Ethan approached cautiously, keeping a careful distance between himself and his former neighbor. "Blackwood, Sheriff Wilson mentioned you were out." "Bet he did." Blackwood's laugh held no humor. "Always was quick to run to you with news. What do you want?" Ethan asked, his voice level but with an edge that Elizabeth had never heard before. Blackwood gestured expansively at the ranch around them. "Just admiring what you've done with the place. My place included." His casual tone hardened. "Prospering while I rotted in prison for 5 years." "You put yourself there when you killed Carter," Ethan replied evenly. "He was just a kid. Casualties happen when men fight for what's theirs." Blackwood's hand moved slightly, hovering near his gun. "I've had a lot of time to think about what you took from me, Blackburn. About how I'm going to get it back." Elizabeth's heart raced as she realized what was about to happen. She moved to the door, the pistol clutched in her hand, torn between staying hidden and going to Ethan's side. "You can't get it back, Victor," Ethan was saying, his stance relaxed but alert. "That land was sold legally. It's mine now, fair and square." "Nothing fair about it," Blackwood snarled, his pretense of civility vanishing. "You knew I needed money, waited until I was desperate, then offered pennies on the dollar." "I offered market value," Ethan countered. "Your gambling debts weren't my problem." Elizabeth could see Miguel circling around behind the barn, rifle in hand, positioning himself for a clear shot if needed. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, ready to snap at any moment. It was Blackwood who moved first, drawing his gun with the swiftness of a man who had spent a lifetime in such confrontations. But Ethan was faster, his revolver clearing its holster before Blackwood could aim. "Don't," Ethan warned, his voice deadly quiet. "I don't want to kill you, Victor." Blackwood froze, his gun half raised, rage and calculation warring in his weathered face. "You won't shoot an unarmed man," he said, slowly lowering his weapon. "No, I won't," Ethan agreed, "but I will defend what's mine, my ranch, my home." His gaze flicked briefly toward the house where Elizabeth watched. "My family." Something in Ethan's tone must have registered with Blackwood. He looked toward the house, then back at Ethan, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "Got yourself a woman, have you?" A cruel smile spread across his face. "Replacing what you lost, just like you replaced my land with yours." Elizabeth saw Ethan's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barely controlled fury in his stance. Before either man could act, she made her decision. Opening the door, she stepped onto the porch, the pistol held firmly but pointed at the ground. "Mr. Blackwood," she called, drawing both men's attention. "I think you should leave now." Blackwood stared at her, momentarily stunned by her appearance. "Well, well." Didn't know Blackburn had such fine taste. His gaze raked over her with insulting thoroughness. "You could do better than him, darlin'." "I couldn't do better than a man of honor," Elizabeth replied coolly. "And you, sir, are trespassing on private property." From the corner of her eye, Elizabeth saw Miguel moving into position, his rifle trained on Blackwood. Ethan had shifted slightly, putting himself between Elizabeth and the potential threat. "The lady's right," Ethan said, his voice hard as stone. "You're not welcome here, Victor. Get on your horse and ride out, and we'll forget this happened." Blackwood's eyes darted between the three of them, calculating his odds. Finally, with a bark of laughter that held no mirth, he holstered his gun. "Always were a lucky bastard, Blackburn." He mounted his horse with deliberate slowness. "But luck runs out eventually. Remember that." With a final glare that encompassed all of them, Blackwood wheeled his horse around and rode away, his figure gradually diminishing as he headed east. Only when he was completely out of sight did Ethan lower his gun. He turned to Elizabeth, concern and admiration warring in his expression. "You shouldn't have come out," he said, though there was no reproach in his voice. "I couldn't stay inside and watch you face him alone," she replied simply. Miguel approached, his rifle still at the ready. "Should I follow him, Jeef? Make sure he leaves the property." Ethan nodded. "Keep your distance, though, and be careful." After Miguel rode out, Ethan took Elizabeth gently by the shoulders. "Are you all right, the twins?" "We're fine," she assured him. "They're inside, still playing. They don't know anything happened." Relief washed over Ethan's face, followed quickly by resolve. I'm riding into town to speak with Sheriff Wilson. Blackwood needs to understand that if he comes back, there will be consequences." Elizabeth laid a hand against his cheek, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Will this ever be over? Will he always be a threat to us?" Ethan covered her hand with his own. "Not if I can help it." His eyes softened as they met hers. "You were very brave, Elizabeth." Not many would have stood their ground against a man like Blackwood. "I was protecting what matters to me," she said simply. "Just as you were." Understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of how much they had to lose and how far they would go to preserve it. The incident with Blackwood cast a shadow over the ranch for several days. Sheriff Wilson increased his patrols in the area, and Ethan and Miguel maintained vigilant watches. But as May gave way to June with no further sign of Victor Blackwood, life gradually returned to normal. Word came from town that Blackwood had been seen boarding a stage headed for Colorado, apparently having decided that whatever unfinished business he had in White Pine wasn't worth the trouble it would bring him. With the threat receding, the atmosphere at the ranch lightened considerably. Summer arrived in earnest, bringing long days of sunshine and the busy work of haying and tending crops. The twins, now 10 months old, thrived in the warm weather, spending hours outdoors under the watchful eyes of Elizabeth, Rosa, or Ethan. One particularly beautiful evening in mid-June, Ethan suggested a ride to the lake that lay on the western edge of his property. "The sunset over the water is something to see," he told Elizabeth, "and it's cooler there, might be nice after such a hot day." They rode out with the twins secured in their special carrier, Joseph chattering excitedly while Hannah watched the passing landscape with wide, curious eyes. The lake, when they reached it, proved to be a small but lovely body of water nestled among pine trees, its surface reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Ethan spread a blanket beneath a large pine and they settled with the twins between them, sharing a simple picnic dinner that Rosa had packed. As they ate, Elizabeth noticed Ethan seemed unusually thoughtful, almost nervous, a state she had rarely seen him in. "Is everything all right?" she asked as the twins played with pine cones they had discovered near the blanket. Ethan smiled, though there was still a tension about him. "Everything's fine, better than fine, actually." He reached into his pocket, seeming to debate with himself before continuing. "I've been carrying something around for a few weeks now, waiting for the right moment." Elizabeth's heart began to race as he withdrew a small, worn leather pouch from his pocket. "Ethan, I meant what I said about courting you properly," he began, his blue eyes earnest in the fading light. "But I've known since that night by the fire that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you, Elizabeth." He opened the pouch and tipped a ring into his palm, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother gave it to me before she passed, said I should save it for when I found the right woman." Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes as Ethan took her hand gently in his. "I thought I'd lost my chance at happiness when Sarah died," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Never imagined I'd find myself here again, asking a woman to share my life." He took a deep breath. "But finding you that night in the snow, it was like God was giving me a second chance, giving all of us a second chance." He glanced at the twins, who had paused in their play to watch this unfamiliar interaction with curious eyes. "I already love Joseph and Hannah as if they were my own," he told Elizabeth, "and I want to be a father to them in every way that matters." Elizabeth couldn't hold back her tears now. They flowed freely down her cheeks as Ethan continued. "Elizabeth Lowell, I love you with all my heart. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Ethan, yes." His smile lit up his entire face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Elizabeth launched herself into his arms, mindful of the twins but unable to contain her joy. Ethan's arms wrapped around her, holding her close as their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promise to one another. Joseph chose that moment to crawl onto Ethan's lap, demanding attention with an imperious babble. Hannah followed, not to be outdone by her brother, settling herself happily on Elizabeth's knee. Laughing through her tears, Elizabeth looked at the family they had formed unexpected, unplanned, but no less perfect for the journey that had brought them together. "When?" she asked, admiring the way her new ring caught the last rays of the setting sun. "As soon as you'd like," Ethan replied, bouncing Joseph gently on his knee. "The Reverend comes through White Pine once a month. He'll be there next weekend." Elizabeth considered this. "That seems very soon." "Too soon?" Ethan asked, concern crossing his features. "We can wait if you prefer." "I don't want to rush you," she shook her head, smiling. "Not too soon, just right, actually." She looked around at the peaceful lake, the darkening sky, the two children who completed their circle. "I think we've waited long enough for happiness, don't you?" Ethan's answering smile was all the confirmation she needed. The news of their engagement spread quickly through White Pine and the surrounding ranches. Sheriff Wilson offered heartfelt congratulations when he stopped by on his regular patrol. Rosa and Miguel were overjoyed, Rosa immediately beginning preparations for a wedding feast worthy of such a special day. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. It took place in White Pine's small church, with Reverend Parker officiating. Miguel stood as Ethan's best man, while Rosa, holding Hannah, served as Elizabeth's matron of honor. Joseph, not to be separated from Ethan even on this important day, remained in the groom's arms throughout the service, occasionally offering his own commentary that made the small gathering of friends and neighbors smile. Elizabeth wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Ethan had ordered from Helena as an engagement gift. Her honey-brown hair was arranged with white wildflowers that Rosa had gathered that morning. But her greatest adornment was the radiant happiness that shone from her face as she pledged her life to Ethan's. For his part, Ethan cut a handsome figure in a new suit, his beard neatly trimmed and his dark hair tamed for the occasion. The tenderness with which he looked at Elizabeth as they exchanged vows brought tears to more than one observer's eyes. "I, Ethan James Blackburn, take you, Elizabeth Marie Lowell, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he declared, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Elizabeth's voice trembled slightly with emotion as she repeated the vows, but her eyes never left Ethan's. "I, Elizabeth Marie Lowell, take you, Ethan James Blackburn, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." When Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan leaned forward to kiss his bride, careful not to crush Joseph between them. The small church erupted in cheers and applause, celebrating not just a union of two people, but the creation of a family that had found its way to one another against all odds. The celebration continued at the ranch, where Rosa and several neighbor women had prepared a feast. Tables were set up in the yard beneath the shade of the large cottonwood trees, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. Music from Miguel's guitar and a neighbor's fiddle filled the air as the afternoon stretched into evening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Elizabeth found herself standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching her new husband dance with Hannah in his arms while Joseph toddled at his feet, trying to mimic the steps. The sight filled her heart with such joy that she thought it might burst. "You look happy, Mrs. Blackburn," came a voice beside her. Sheriff Wilson had joined her, offering a glass of lemonade. "I am, Sheriff," she replied, accepting the drink with a smile. "Happier than I ever thought possible again." Wilson nodded, his gruff features softening. "Ethan deserves it, you all do." He glanced toward the dancers. "Those little ones couldn't ask for a better father." "No, they couldn't," Elizabeth agreed softly. "Thomas would be pleased, I think. He wanted so much for them to be loved and cared for." "No doubt he's looking down with approval," the sheriff said, surprising Elizabeth with his sentiment. With a tip of his hat, he moved away, leaving her to her thoughts. Ethan approached a few minutes later, Hannah still in his arms and Joseph trailing behind, clutching his father's pant leg. "There you are," he said, his smile warm in the fading light. "I was beginning to think my bride had run off." "Never," Elizabeth assured him, reaching up to caress Hannah's cheek. "I was just watching you with our children, storing the memory away." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes at her words, a depth of emotion that needed no verbal expression. "Our children," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." As if understanding the significance of the moment, Joseph raised his arms to Elizabeth. "Mama," he said clearly, his first real word. Hannah, not to be outdone, patted Ethan's cheek and declared, "Da." Elizabeth gasped with delight, scooping Joseph into her arms and covering his face with kisses. "Clever boy, you said Mama." Ethan was similarly affected by Hannah's achievement, his eyes suspiciously bright as he praised her. "That's right, sweetheart, I'm your Da." The twins, pleased with the attention their new skills had garnered, repeated their words with increasing confidence. The simple terms Mama and Da held a world of meaning for the newly formed family, a verbal confirmation of the bonds that had grown between them. As night fell and the last of their guests departed, Ethan and Elizabeth stood on the porch of their home, the twins finally asleep after the excitement of the day. Ethan's arm circled Elizabeth's waist, drawing her close against the evening chill. "Happy, Mrs. Blackburn?" he asked, echoing Sheriff Wilson's earlier question. Elizabeth turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his face, the face that had become so dear to her in the months since he'd found her in the snow. "More than I can say," she whispered. "You've given us a home, a family, a future." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "You're the ones who gave those things to me," he corrected gently. "When I found you that night, I was just doing what needed doing. I had no idea you'd end up saving me." They stood together in the quiet of the Montana night, listening to the sounds of their ranch, the gentle lowing of cattle in the distant pasture, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. Sounds of home, sounds of peace. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Elizabeth asked softly. "If that stagecoach driver hadn't abandoned us, if you hadn't been tracking that mountain lion that day." "I try not to," Ethan admitted. "Makes my blood run cold to think of you and the little ones out there alone." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I prefer to believe it was meant to be, that no matter what paths we took, we would have found each other somehow." Elizabeth smiled at the sentiment, so unlike Ethan's usual practicality. "I believe that too," she said, resting her head against his chest. "And I'm grateful every day for the man who built a fire in the snow and said, 'You're all staying.'" Ethan chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Best decision I ever made." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, closing the door on the past, and stepping together into the future they would build day by day, season by season, year by year, as husband and wife, as mother and father, as the family they had become against all odds in the wild heart of Montana. Epilogue: 10 years later, the sound of children's laughter filled the summer air as Elizabeth Blackburn stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching her family with a heart full of contentment. 10 years had brought many changes to Blackburn Ranch, all of them for the better. Joseph and Hannah, now 10 years old, were helping their younger siblings gather wildflowers in the meadow near the house. 8-year-old Sarah, named for Ethan's first wife, directed the operation with the natural authority of an eldest daughter. 6-year-old William, bearing the name of the son Ethan had lost, followed his sister's instructions with good-natured tolerance, while 4-year-old Thomas, named for Elizabeth's first husband, toddled behind, determined not to be left out. In the corral nearby, Ethan was working with a young colt, his movements patient and sure as he guided the animal through its paces. The years had added a few strands of silver to his dark hair and beard, but had taken nothing from his strength or vitality. If anything, happiness had made him more handsome in Elizabeth's eyes. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. What had once been a successful but modest operation had grown into one of the most respected in the territory. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, and new outbuildings had been added as the ranch's activities diversified. Miguel and Rosa still lived in their cabin, though they were more family than employees now. Their guidance had been invaluable as Elizabeth and Ethan navigated the challenges of raising 5 children in the sometimes harsh Montana environment. Elizabeth smiled as she watched Joseph demonstrate to young Thomas how to make a daisy chain. Her firstborn had grown into a thoughtful, intelligent boy with a natural affinity for books and learning, much like his biological father had been. According to the letters and journals Thomas Lowell had left behind. Hannah, by contrast, was her father's daughter in every way that mattered. She loved horses and the outdoors, often accompanying Ethan on his rides around the property. Though not related by blood, she had somehow inherited his quick mind for practical matters and his deep connection to the land. Neither twin remembered a time before Ethan was their father, and he had never treated them differently from the children he and Elizabeth had together. All 5 Blackburn children were raised with the same love, the same values, the same sense of belonging to this place and to one another. Elizabeth's reflections were interrupted by the approach of riders from the direction of town. She recognized Sheriff Wilson, older now but still serving the community, accompanied by a smartly dressed younger man she didn't know. "Ethan," she called, drawing her husband's attention to their visitors. Ethan secured the colt in the corral and walked over to meet the sheriff, extending a hand in welcome. "Wilson, didn't expect to see you out this way today." The sheriff shook Ethan's hand, then nodded respectfully to Elizabeth. "Mrs. Blackburn, looking lovely as ever. What brings you to our doorstep, Sheriff?" Elizabeth asked, noting the official manner of the visit. Wilson gestured to his companion, who had dismounted and was approaching with an air of importance. "This is Mr. James Harrington from the Territorial Governor's office. He has some business to discuss with you both." Curiosity piqued, Elizabeth invited the men inside, calling to Rosa to watch the children. Once seated at the kitchen table with coffee, Mr. Harrington came straight to the point. "Mr. Blackburn, Mrs. Blackburn, I've been sent to inform you that Governor Potts is recommending White Pine for incorporation as a proper town, with all the benefits that entails." He spread several documents on the table. "The territory is growing rapidly, and White Pine's strategic location makes it an ideal candidate for development." Ethan and Elizabeth exchanged glances. They had noticed increased traffic through the area in recent months, with more settlers arriving every week. "That's welcome news," Ethan acknowledged. "But what does it have to do with us specifically?" Harrington smiled. "The governor is familiar with your reputation, Mr. Blackburn, your fair dealing with neighbors, your assistance to new settlers, your support of the school." He nodded to Elizabeth, acknowledging her role in establishing White Pine's first proper schoolhouse 3 years earlier. "He would like you to consider serving as White Pine's first mayor." The proposal took Ethan by surprise. "Mayor, I'm a rancher, Mr. Harrington, not a politician." "Which is precisely why you're the right man for the job," Sheriff Wilson interjected. "People trust you, Ethan. They know you'll do right by them." Elizabeth watched her husband's face, seeing the conflict there. Ethan had always preferred action to words, practical solutions to political maneuvering. But she also recognized the opportunity this presented not just for him, but for the community they had come to love. "It would mean a great deal for White Pine," she said softly, touching Ethan's hand. "And for our children's future." Ethan considered this, his blue eyes thoughtful. "I'd need to maintain the ranch as my primary concern," he said finally, "and I'd want assurances about the school continuing under Mrs. Blackburn's direction." Harrington nodded eagerly. Of course. "The position isn't meant to be full-time, at least not initially. And the governor is a strong supporter of education." As the men discussed details, Elizabeth found her mind drifting back to that snowy night 10 years ago, when a half-frozen woman with twin babies had been at the end of her strength and resources. How impossible it would have seemed then that she would one day be the wife of a respected rancher, the mother of 5 children, a teacher, and potentially the wife of White Pine's first mayor. Life's paths were indeed unpredictable, she reflected. One moment could change everything: a stagecoach driver's callous decision, a mountain lion's predations that led a rancher to ride out in a snowstorm, a fire built in the wilderness, and four simple words: "You're all staying." From such small beginnings, a lifetime of love and happiness had grown. As she looked at her husband, now deep in conversation about White Pine's future, Elizabeth felt a wave of gratitude for the journey they had shared, and the one that still stretched before them, a journey that had begun on that cold Montana night when a cowboy with a kind heart had refused to leave a woman and her children in the cold.